You are getting ready for bed. Donned in your sleep clothes, you are all comfy with your head nestled on a pillow. You are eager to have a good night's sleep. You may now turn off the light and let us begin our bedtime story. This story is fictional, but based mostly from a historical account. The title of tonight's reading is When Gray Skies Turned to Blue. It was a gray day. The sky seemed to chime with the sadness that permeated the atmosphere. Dark, formidable clouds were threatening to burst, and the wind howled loudly, brushing leaves and sand in a full sweep, and also in forms of dancing cones with the debris it gathered. A woman sat by the well, unperturbed by the surroundings, except that she too was in deep sorrow. She had been sobbing all morning. Her long grayed hair were in disarray, and her eyes were now hardly able to open from the swelling her mourning had wrought upon them. Up in the distance, overlooking the rocky red mountains of Moab, her two daughters-in-law were holding each other, as distraught as the elderly woman was. Ruth, the youngest of the three women, found a voice amidst the pain she felt. "Oh, how I miss Mahlon. We were planning to have children, and now without a son or daughter, he had passed too, as your Killian Orpah, and our father Elimelech." She squeezed her sister-in-law's hand to steady herself, as she had been hyperventilating from the sudden news that they received. From the well where she sat, the older woman answered with loud sobs, "Do not call me Naomi, but Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. My husband and my two sons are now gone," she wailed. "I had arrived here with bright hopes, but now I shall depart in grief. We had left Israel because of a famine, and now a greater famine of the soul compels me home." Both women ran to embrace their mother-in-law. They had grown to love her deeply. Naomi had been very kind and gentle with them. They can never forget her stories as they cooked, spun garments, and weaved baskets together. Her stories were of a land and people beyond the Jordan. She had taught them many things, but most especially on how to care and love God and others. Now, though they grieved for their own loss, they also were deeply concerned for Naomi and her plight. "I shall go back to Bethlehem, for I have nothing here anymore. My lovely young girls, you still have your families here, and you are also able to acquire husbands for yourselves. But I have only the hope that our little house is still intact back in Israel, and that I could be helped by the mercies of our family and neighbors there. Word around has it that the divine has sent abundant bread back home." "Then we will go with you," the two young women blurted in unison. "My darling daughters, you both have given me much joy. The pain of life had been eased, because if there is one thing that smiled on me, it is the two of you. But now let us not contend, for I shall not have you suffer with me. Go back to your families. You are both young and can marry again. I shall be well. I still have faith, and I still believe that God will not completely disregard me." Her lips quavered when she spoke, but a certain spark had already penetrated the seeming complete darkness from despair in her eyes earlier. "You are a dear mother, and I shall never forget you." Orpah gave Naomi a kiss and a tight hug, and then turned to Ruth to do the same. With reluctance, she stood up then to pack her belongings. She realized she would be better off remaining in the land of Moab, as her mother-in-law had advised. Orpah was deeply grateful for all the kindness she had received from Naomi, and though sad that they would have to part ways, a spark of hope had been planted in her heart, and she knew she would never forget the family, especially the woman that had sown the seed. When Orpah departed, Naomi turned to Ruth, but all she saw instead was a sheer determination in her other daughter's countenance. The latter wiped every last trickle of tears from her face and eyes, and with a hopeful cheer she announced, "I shall go with you, mother. I have not changed my mind. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." So it was that the two widows endured the arduous journey from Moab back to the land of the Hebrew people. They both arrived in Bethlehem exhausted, but it was not long after that Naomi found their old abode still standing, howbeit very dusty and worn because of time. They both swept and cleaned the floors, the plastered walls and ceilings, gathered hay and water for the mule that had carried them on their journey, and lastly, prepared a cold meal from the remainder of the bread and cheese they had packed with them for their travel. The sky outside had closed curtain already, though thousands of twinkling starlights shone from an open window. The two women lay down on their rolled-out mats, gazing at the heavenly wonder. They felt such a relief and hope. It embraced and comforted them like a warm blanket on a cold night. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "and thank you, my dear Ruth. May God bless you for the care you have shown to me." Ruth was deeply touched. Her mother had never been as kind and tender as Naomi. There were always many expectations and demands of her, and never a word of appreciation given back. All the more she was convinced she needed to smart up and find a way to fend for the two of them, and especially to make sure Naomi would be provided for. "You are dear to me, and you are the one I consider my mother, and you know that. I will always be here for you." She clasped the other lady's hand. "Oh, and by the way, having said that, would you know how I might be able to work here?" Naomi turned to gaze upon Ruth. She admired her daughter-in-law's spunk. Ruth was a ravishingly beautiful young maiden. She had almond-shaped dark eyes, a slightly upturned nose, full red lips, and slightly plump cheeks, which made her look much younger than her age. "You could have baited a husband to take care of you, Ruth, but you chose to be with an old hag," she joked. "Stop kidding, Mother. I am serious." She feigned annoyance, then smiled widely. "We shall make it, I know, because I believe in you and our God, and His many wonders and miracles." Ruth was determined, inspired by the stories Naomi had told her. Having thought of the tales she loved, she once again pled for her roommate to retell the story about the parting of the Red Sea until she drifted to a deep sleep, dreaming of chariots and horses and fishes peeking from water walls. The next day, Ruth hummed a melodious tune as she brought in a small basket of wild berries she had plucked from the growth at the back of the house. She was already excited and ready to go out to the fields to gather wheat for their supper. Naomi had suggested for her to call after the reapers at any farm she would want to glean from. It was a consensus in Israel that every owned and developed field should leave whatever falls off during the harvest for those who were in need, so that even those who had none could still eat. Ruth was once again cheery. In Israel, hope seemed to abound. Just then, a short and rather plump maiden, Ruth guessed was around her age, peeked through the open slats of a door. "Neighbor, we noticed a stirring here yesterday and wondered whether our Aunt Naomi and Uncle Elimelech had come home," she asked. Ruth immediately opened the shutters and let in the sprightly lady. "I am Ruth," she introduced, just as Naomi came out of the bedroom to join them. The older dame was ecstatic when she recognized the guest. "Oh, is it you, Milka? How are you, my dear? You were just a tiny girl when we left. How are your parents and brothers?" Naomi opened her arms to hug the visitor as she blurted inquiry upon inquiry. "We are so glad you are back, dear aunt. We are all well. Mother had asked me to bring these just in case it were really you who had arrived. Here are some curds and a jar of milk from our sheep." "God does provide." Naomi winked at Ruth, who was overjoyed by the offerings, and then she continued the introduction. "Ruth here is my daughter-in-law, but alas, her husband, my son Mahlon, just passed away. Elimelech, your uncle, and our other son Kilian are now gone too." Milcah's eyes widened. "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that. Mother and father would be too. How we missed all of you." A tear dropped from her eyes, and a sincere offer came out of her lips. "Please, do not hesitate to call on us. We are here in any case you would also need any of our assistance." "Well, Ruth was planning to do some gleaning today," the older lady was quick to relay, as she was certain that her daughter-in-law and her niece would make out to be great friends. As sure as day, Milcah volunteered to accompany the newcomer to the fields. It was a relief to Ruth, as she was still unsure about her new environment and the way of its people. Indeed, Milcah was proving a potential great friend already. Out in the open, Ruth worked tirelessly, collecting as much grain after the reapers. Milcah showed her new friend around and even introduced her to the people working the grounds. Later in the afternoon, as everyone were about to call it a day, a sound of hooves could be heard, and everyone looked up to see a company of men on horses coming briskly toward them. "Hey, everything okay here?" a strong male voice echoed from the riders. "Yes, indeed, sir. We are having a great harvest, for the Lord has blessed your crops," one of the workers exclaimed. Milcah immediately cupped her hand on Ruth's ear. "That is Boaz, Lord of this land you glean upon." Ruth immediately bowed low. Boaz took notice of the lady on her knees, and he looked rather surprised. "Who are you?" he asked. "Please stand up." She did as ordered and also answered carefully. "I am Ruth, a widow of Naomi's son Mahlon. We had just come from Moab, and I am here in behalf of my mother-in-law to gather from your fields. We are truly grateful, master." Boaz was enthralled by Ruth. "So you are the one people had just been talking about, the daughter-in-law of Naomi, who had chosen to leave her own homeland to embrace her mother-in-law and care for her. You are commendable, Ruth. You must from now on stay and gather from here. You need not go to any other fields. You shall have more than enough. May the Lord, who you now rely upon, and in whose wings you have come to take refuge in, greatly reward you." He smiled and ordered his men secretly to intentionally leave more for Ruth to be able to take, and to have her be treated very well by every staff and personnel in his property. Ruth was exuberant when she came home with such bountiful gifts for the table. She excitedly told Naomi about Boaz and his generosity, as well as the kindness of those who worked for him. Naomi began to conjure a cocktail of ideas in her mind and started to well up with joy and happiness. "You have to obey me, my daughter, for what I have in mind will bring you true gladness. I have faith in my nephew Boaz, and we, my dear, shall be redeemed. He is a close relative, but you must do exactly as I say." After the many days of harvest, and Ruth obtaining substantial provisions for their home, Naomi broached on a plan she had been playing over and over in her mind. Ruth simply obeyed her mother-in-law's instructions, and on the night of the culmination of the barley harvest, she bathed extensively and put on her best midnight blue gown and scarlet veil. She also adorned herself with the gemmed embellished gold accessories she had brought with her from Moab. After pouring the last of her perfume, she hastened toward the threshing floor, where the reapers were enjoying themselves and celebrating the abundance of the year's harvest. Though there was much frenzy to observe, Ruth had only eyes fixated on one. She watched Boaz keenly, and after he had eaten and drank with his friends, she took notice that he lay down to sleep by the heap of corn. When all the lamps had been snuffed out, she slowly approached him while he dozed, and she gently took off his sandals, then quietly positioned herself to lay down at his feet. Boaz then stirred. Startled by the intrusion, he called out in the dark of that moonless night, "Who is there?" he called as he somehow traced a woman's form at the bottom of his mat. Ruth immediately propped up. "It is I, Ruth, your handmaid. Please spread your garment over me, for you are nearest of kin." She worded it all as instructed by her mother-in-law. Boaz calmed down as he realized who the visitor was, and he grinned. In the darkness, he basked in the sweet perfume that wafted from Ruth. He was greatly pleased. "Blessed are you, daughter, for you have shown more kindness in the latter end than in the beginning. You did not run after younger men. Fear not, for I will do to you all that you require of me. In this place, everyone has been talking about your great virtue. I am indeed your near kinsman, but there is one even nearer than I. Stay this night, and it shall be that in the morning I will settle this matter with him. As the Lord lives, I will take care of this. If he chooses to perform his duties as close as kin, so be it. But if not, I will certainly do the part of kinsman redeemer to you." Ruth laid at his feet, feeling more secure by Boaz's pledge. She slept peacefully, but arose early before anyone could recognize her or realize that a woman had been at the threshing floor. Before she departed, he asked her to hold out her veil, and he poured barley on the crimson cloth she snatched from her head. Filled with fervor and a tingling feeling of a girl in love once more, she went home promptly, singing a sweet melody. Naomi was waiting for Ruth when she arrived. They both immediately talked excitedly about all that had transpired. "He is much more than I could hope for, mother. He even gave this generous offering, for he did not want me to leave empty-handed. I pray that God would grant me Boaz as my kinsman redeemer. He is such a wonderful person, so full of kindness." Ruth felt only pure bliss that moment. "Sit still then, my daughter, for Boaz will not rest till all is accomplished today," the older lady assured Ruth, with a beam on her face as well. A year after the day Ruth had come to the threshing floor, she bore a son. "I am so happy. My heart is nearly about to burst." She looked at her husband in awe and gratitude. "You did all that you promised to do. God has favored me indeed by giving me you, Boaz." Her husband felt a swelling of such pride and overwhelming happiness. He was so much older than Ruth, and yet he felt like any young lad swooned by a lovely lady. He slid his arm on his wife's waist as he looked into her deep, dark, sparkling eyes. "Well, it took some convincing with my cousin, but it all came out well and good. He did not want to implicate his inheritance by taking on the house of Elimelech, but honestly, I have been the one more blessed because of it. You are all that I could ever hope for, my dearest." He kissed his wife's forehead and bent on to do the same on his son. "Now, children, all this mushy talk, give Obed to me." Naomi blushed as the two had seemingly forgotten that someone else was in the room. "Oh, definitely, mother." Ruth felt suddenly shy. "Here you are." She offered her infant son to his grandmother. The matriarch of the house exclaimed, "I can't seem to get enough of you, my grandson. They say you shall be restorer of my life and my nourisher in my old age." She tickled the newborn and laughed heartily. With the baby in one arm, she threw open all shutters and exclaimed with exuberance, "I am filled with happiness. Look outside, how the skies have turned clear blue." as they have all said to me, I am truly blessed indeed with a daughter who is better than 7 sons. Then she turned toward the couple, still in each other's embrace. And to you, Boaz, how the women speak highly of you. God had turned it all around for me and Ruth because of you. I am deeply blessed. Thank you, my children. And oh, praise the Lord, who has turned my mourning into dancing. And with that, Naomi swirled with the baby and intentionally swayed to the right and then to the left before she closed the bedroom door behind them. Boaz and Ruth giggled at the changed woman. They marveled at how Naomi, formerly filled with woe, had become all cheery and bright. Ruth was certain it was the doing of the God they all trusted, for he was the expert on the happily ever afters. We have now reached the end of our story. Good night and sleep tight.